Good morning from Helsinki. Saturday morning, it's about 7 a.m. Nice, crisp walk this morning. It did rain a little bit overnight, but temperatures are staying right around 5 degrees, even in the wee hours of the morning. You notice these things when you're hiking and camping a lot. Notice the slight temperature differences. But yeah, it's been very pleasant, very invigorating. I had a long conversation with someone about do the cold bath thing, and I was like, you know what, sleeping cold, which I've learned over the last few months, being on the hiking trail, is I think it is so good for regulating your system and for sleeping better and just all kinds of health benefits. I can't recommend it enough. I wanted to do a nice long poem that you don't even feel that it's long because it's so gorgeous and beautiful and meaningful. Um, the lyricism just takes you away, and it's by Theodore Roethke. Roethke, um, I had heard of him, I had read him a little bit, but then when I moved to Seattle, I lived most of my 20s into Seattle. I still consider Seattle kind of my city. I've lived there more than anywhere as an adult, and still have so many friends there. Love it, and it was, of course, coming of age type of thing when you live somewhere in your 20s. I think it always has particular resonance. But Retke, it's kind of remarkable that, especially in today's culture, to think about a poet that could have so much. Um, there's so many scraps and shadows of him, even in today's Seattle. He died in 1963, I believe. He had been a professor at the University of Washington, apparently a fantastic English poetry professor. But he's principally known, of course, for his own excellent poetry, one of the best of the 20th century. There's some debate about that. It's kind of like the whole thing about the sum of the parts somehow missing a little bit. In that, like there's some stanzas and lines of his poetry that is just beyond comparison, but sometimes the totality, like I feel that one poet that I've been reading a lot, Thomas Tranströmer, achieves more of a more power and resolution, I think, in his poetry. And whereas Retke, it feels like something's missing. No matter how gorgeous the lines are, no matter how poignant, no matter how deep, like I feel like Tranströmer, when I complete one of his poems, it's like you feel this alignment, this deep resonance, this power. Whereas Retke is just like, yeah, God, that was gorgeous. It's, I'll read that again. I got a lot out of it, but something's missing. I can't define it, but anyway. So we're going to read this long poem. So yeah, I lived on Bainbridge Island for a few years in like 2005, 6, actually, yeah, 2003, 2006, that kind of era. It was phenomenal. And I was, taking the ferry into Seattle most days, which definitely changes your life. But I didn't, I became a member of the Bloedel Reserve, which is a phenomenal, gorgeous corner of Bainbridge Island that has many different elements to it, excellent hiking spots, and it maintained just gorgeous. Um, there's a beautiful home. They have little events and music. There's the ponds. There's the huge reflecting pool. There's it's just you can tell that it's a labor of love. And they have a Japanese pavilion. They have a Zen garden. And I didn't know until I was almost leaving Bainbridge Island, but that's where the poet Theodore Roethke died. Um, that part of the estate had been a home that belonged to a friend of his, and he had a friend had a swimming pool there, and Rettke had a heart attack and died in that swimming pool. People still make a pilgrimage to, or I was aware of it 20 years ago, that people would still make a pilgrimage sometimes if they were particularly affected by his poetry. There's no marker. You just have to know it. You have to have read it somewhere. And so that what they did is they filled in the swimming pool and made a very beautiful Zen garden, which is it's just a lovely tribute, I guess. And I was really drawn to that part of the reserve, and then I found out that it had even more meaning with Rettke. But it is remarkable that you also feel his presence in the U District. I mean, obviously he was a professor at the university, but his favorite dive bar was the Blue Moon, which is famous and well loved, and I think it's been there 90 years at least. And so they named an alleyway by the Blue Moon after Rettke as well. And so it's like, well, who is this guy? He's a poet and a professor, and he has all this. There's all these little memories, mementos, memorials, that type of thing. Anyway, let's just see. Now, this poem reminds me of a little bit of Bainbridge, a little bit of my nature of being a wanderer and a walker and a hiker, lover of the forest and nature, forest fin. But it particularly reminds me of many, many drives that I would take out onto the Olympic Peninsula, which is a phenomenal part of the country. I think it's one of the top 10 places to go in the States. I had relatives who lived, kind of distant relatives on my father's side, who lived on the canal, on the Hood Canal, in a place called Seebeck. And so when I was living on Bainbridge, you could take this long, winding path. I mean, obviously you could use the ferry system, but you could also just drive through this beautiful peninsula, and then there'd be excursions and stops along the way, etc. But that's what I kind of thought about it, all these solo treks that I took through the peninsula. So with all that nonsense, I'm going to just read it through, and you're just going to see how gorgeous it is, and you're going to want to read it yourself, and keep it in your heart. It's called The Far Field, Theodore Roethke. I dream of journeys repeatedly, of flying like a bat deep into a narrow tunnel, of driving alone without luggage out a long peninsula, the road lined with snow-laden second growth, a fine dry snow ticking the windshield, alternate snow and sleet, no oncoming traffic, and no lights behind in the blurred side mirror. The road changing from glazed tar face to a rubble of stone, ending at last in a hopeless sand rut, where the car stalls, churning in a snowdrift until the headlights darken. At the field's end, in the corner missed by the mower, where the turf drops off into a grass-hidden culvert, haunt of the catbird, nesting place of the field mouse, not too far away from the ever-changing flower dump. Among the tin cans, tires, rusted pipes, broken machinery, one learned of the eternal. And in the shrunken face of a dead rat, eaten by rain and ground beetles, I found in line among the rubble of an old coal bin, and the tomcat caught near the pheasant run, its entrails strewn over the half-grown flowers, blasted to death by the night watchman. I suffered for young birds, for young rabbits caught in the mower. My grief was not excessive. For to come upon warblers in early May was to forget time and death. How they filled the oriole's elm, a twittering restless cloud, all one morning. And I watched and watched till my eyes blurred from the bird shapes, Cape May, Blackburnian, cerulean, moving, elusive as fish, fearless, hanging, bunched like young fruit, bending the end branches, still for a moment, then pitching away in the half-light. Lighter than finches, while the wrens bickered and sang in the half-green hedgerows and the flicker drummed from his dead tree in the chicken yard. Or to lie naked in sand in the silted shallow of a slow river, fingering a shell, thinking, once I was something like this, mindless, or perhaps with another mind, less peculiar, or to sink down to the hips in a mossy quagmire, or with skinny knees to sit astride a wet log, believing I'll return again as a snake or a raucous bird, or with luck as a lion. I learned not to fear affinity, the far field, the windy cliffs of forever, the dying of time and the white light of tomorrow, the wheel turning away from itself, the sprawl of the wave, the oncoming water. The river turns on itself, the tree retreats into its own shadow. I feel a weightless change, a moving forward, as of water quickening before a narrowing channel, when banks converge and the wide river whitens, or when two rivers combine, the blue glacial torrent and the yellowish green from the mountainy upland. At first a swift rippling between rocks, then a long running over flat stones, before descending to the alluvial plain. To the clay banks, to the wild grapes hanging from the elm trees, the slightly trembling water, dropping a fine yellow silt where the sun stays, and the crabs bask near the edge, the weedy edge alive with small snakes and bloodsuckers. I've come to a still but not a deep center. A point outside the glittering current, my eyes stare at the bottom of a river, at the irregular stones, iridescent sand grains. My mind moves in more than one place in a country, half land, half water. I'm renewed by death, thought of my death, the dry scent of a dying garden in September, the wind fanning the ash of a low fire. What I love is near at hand, always, in earth and air. The lost self changes, turning toward the sea, a sea shape turning around. An old man with his feet before the fire, in robes of green, in garments of adieu. A man faced with his own immensity, wakes all the waves, all their loose wandering fire. The murmur of the absolute, the why of being born, falls on his naked ears. His spirit moves like monumental wind that gentles on a sunny blue plateau. He is the end of things, the final man. All finite things reveal infinitude, the mountain with its singular bright shade, like the blue shine on freshly frozen snow, the afterlight upon ice-burdened pines, odor of basswood on a mountain slope, a scent beloved of trees, silence of water above a sunken tree, the pure serene of memory in one man, a ripple widening from a single stone, winding around the waters of the world. And that is probably the most beautiful words you will hear or read today. You can put in the comments if you read something more beautiful today. It's everything you want in a poem, but still, I think there's a little bit of glut in there, or like sometimes I think he gets a little bit carried away. But anyway, no, it's absolutely gorgeous. I can't write anything like that, at least not today. This whole poetry series started with Bly, and Bly actually deeply respected Roethke. And I think Roethke was influenced by some of the same poets. They weren't obviously quite contemporaries. I think Roethke was about 20 years older than Bly, lived kind of a short life. He died in his mid-50s in Seattle in that pool on Bainbridge Island. But he was from Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan, actually. And so there's some connection, Michigan, Minnesota. Roethke was a manic depressive. He had many states during his life. He he was really marked by, I believe there was one year when he was in his preteens where both his uncle, who he was close to, I believe, who lived next door, and his father died in the same year. And that left some unresolved issues that he dealt with for the rest of his life, and comes out in his poetry. So it's quite interesting how he worked so hard to he had a lot to transcend. I think that's what I mean, and he got deeply into theology. And one theologian he studied and he loved very deeply, that you can hear echoes of in this poem that I just read, "The Far Field," is Paul Tillich. And Paul Tillich I really became aware of through a dear friend of mine, a professor I had in Montreal, Barbara Golly. And so I read some Tillich, and his quotes are lovely. It almost feels like he's, when you read him, it's like if you often feel that, you know what, I could have said something very similar, but Tillich said it first, and he's just rearranging or placing words in a slightly different way, where it's like, where you feel the resonance more. And he tricks you into thinking deep thoughts. It's almost like he's talking in a more casual style, but then he kind of brings in something that you think back on. I often think of the poet from the Dark Ages, Yehuda Halevi, Spanish Jewish poet, who said, "My words are too difficult for you, therefore they appear to be too simple." And Paul Tillich would say things like, God is being itself, being in itself. God is being itself, and to argue God exists denies him, which is an interesting way to state that. Then you're thinking God, yeah, I could have said that. But I didn't. Paul Tillich did. And he talked a lot about doubt, and he talked about, and I like it. He would just bring things up that we don't feel is polite or smart or sophisticated to talk about, but then he gets you out of that mode. He says, "Meaningless is no threat so long as enthusiasm for the universe and for man is still alive." Something like that. I think that's what he said. And that, doubt is essential for gaining knowledge. And that's a very, very pedestrian idea. It sounds like a TED Talk idea, some kind of mindless nonsense. But it's but it is so true. It's and when you're attuned to that, you notice it. That people who don't doubt always overestimate their knowledge, and then they're the ones who can't really learn much, because they don't start with the questions, they don't embrace the questions, they're too afraid to doubt things. So it's Paul Tillich will help you a lot psychically. So will Theodore Roethke. I love that poem just for the music of it, but also, it's just like that idea of I know poetry when I hear it. That's obviously, first-rank poetry, even if I'm not paying attention to the flow of the words and what they really mean and what levels and layers of meaning could be in those words, and what is the poet driving at? What does this mean? It's you can take it on just the level of, that's gorgeous. It's making me see the world in different ways. It's making me feel different. I can feel the emotion without overthinking what is being conveyed. And I think Bly was hugely influenced by that, as well as other poets like Transtromer that or Harry Martinson or people like that. But it was kind of this this high lyrical, not classical, but still some echoes of the tradition in there. And it was, but he brought something new into it, and that was just kind of like this, not being afraid of vernacular, I think, and not being afraid of roots and vernacular, and trusting in your own self and observations, but then kind of telling that up to this kind of, I guess, it's kind of, I don't know where I came across this term, but pastoral surrealism, which is just a good way to describe Bly, and I think he got some of that from Roethke. Bly wrote a couple essays in the 50s and 60s. He had a little journal magazine called the 50s and then the 60s, where he was talking about new ways to reinvigorate. I guess that word was unnecessary. There's ways to reinvigorate American poetry and looking towards like something fresh. And it was this simplicity, this introspection, lyrical style, leaping quality, where the associations and going back between conscious, unconscious, connecting with the great spirits of the past and other cultures, but also rooted in very, very close observation and this idea of a pastoral surrealism. And so it was like, yeah, I feel it's so funny. I read so many other poets much more than Roethke, but he got under my skin because I lived in Seattle, and I don't even know if I would really recognize his picture, but you feel the spirit in different parts of Seattle, and that it's just really kind of remarkable that a city like that would call out and name specific places after someone who's just a professor and a poet, and such interesting places. And contrast the U District, the Blue Moon's on 45th between not 9th, it'd be maybe 7th and 8th. And so they named this little alleyway by there. Apparently he left a big impression on the place, and the place left a big impression on him. And then, of course, that beautiful Zen garden on Bainbridge Island. And then I like how that, when I think of the Olympic Peninsula and all the drives that I took through there, and camping and hiking through the park and all along the Hood Canal, that poem kind of rings in my head. I never memorized it, but it might be a worthy endeavor. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed a little Theodore Roethke, and we will talk again soon. Have a wonderful weekend.